Hello, this is PeterEntwistle with the second Swift programming tutorial. In this video I'm going to be talking about variables in Swift, and specifically if you've come from another C-style language or especially say JavaScript. I just want to point out a few differences between the syntax, because at first glance it looks very much the same variable in Swift and JavaScript, but they are quite different in the way that they work. Here's where we left off in the last video. So we printed hello world. This is the most simple program you can write really in Swift. Okay, so I'm going to carry on in this file here. I'll probably save it as a separate file later. One thing I want to actually point out at the moment is, if you've come from another C-style language, you probably used to putting a semicolon at the end of each line, and in Swift you can actually put a semicolon at the end, but it's not necessary at all unless you've got multiple statements on the same line. So for the most part I won't be putting any semicolons at the end of any of the lines. In Swift, to declare a variable you actually use the keyword var, and so I'm going to make a variable called name, and I'm going to set it equal to Peter. So if you've come from a language like JavaScript, you'll be very familiar with this syntax, but I do want to point out that Swift is a strongly typed language, so name is holding a string type, and once created it can't hold any other data type. So I can't set name equal to an integer or a float or any other data type, which in a language such as JavaScript you can actually change the type of data that a variable holds, but that's not the case in Swift. This is a safety feature more than anything, but what actually happens is Swift infers the type based on what data you pass to it. So if you want to be explicit, you can actually tell it that it is a string. So to do that you would put a colon and then the data type, so in this case it's going to be a string. Now you might be wondering, why would you want to actually, why would you use this, and why would you add the type if it can already infer the type? The main reason is because if I wanted to declare the variable and then set the value later on, to do that I would have to say var name and then give it the data type that it's going to hold later, and then later on in the program I can actually set that equal to some string, so just like that. Of course the same can be said for any other type of data. So if you want to create a variable that holds an integer, we can do that. Say we could do a float as well, so let's say 5.2, and actually just want to mention something. I think by default this will actually be a double, not a float, so I want to make sure that this is a float, so I'm going to explicitly tell Swift that I want this to hold a floating point value. Okay, so we have a string, an integer and a float, so we could also make a boolean, just the same as any of the other data types that we've got before. So if you want to make one called is enabled, we'll set that equal to false. So in Swift, unlike in Objective-C, a boolean is either true or false, which is more similar to other C-based languages, but in Objective-C it's yes or no. And once again we could actually explicitly tell Swift what data type this is going to hold, so we can say bool for boolean. There is something else I want to point out with Swift, and that is, say for example I wanted to add these two numbers up here, In some languages, you could actually add X and Y and you'd get the value with no problem. But in Swift, if you try this, I'll just type it out to show you what happens. Notice we actually get an error. Basically this is because we're trying to add an integer and a float. Swift won't allow us to actually do this because it won't implicitly convert values from one type to another, but we can actually convert it ourselves. The easiest way to do this would be to tell Swift to treat X as a float. So to do that, we just type float and then put X inside the brackets like that. So we get the correct answer here at the side. Another thing we could have done is we could have actually made this a float. By default, X is going to be inferred as a integer because we haven't got any decimal points, but we could actually tell it to be a float or a double if we wanted to. If you're actually new to programming and don't know what a variable is, basically it allows us to store some data that we can then change later on in our program. So for example, this value X we've created up here, we might want to use that in our program at some point, and then we might want to change that value, so I can then make X equal, say, 8, and now X will be equal to 8. We'll be doing some more examples later on, once we get into some more complicated code, and you'll be able to see variables in action later on. I think I've covered everything for this episode, and in the next episode I think I'll be talking about constants in Swift, which are quite important. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.